I can't go on with you anymore. I took a breath and then made it clear. I will be returning to my parents' home. Huh? What about my meals? The cleaning? If you're leaving, write a divorce application before you go. Upon hearing my words, my husband Ronald started ranting in anger. He immediately opened a drawer and took out a sheet of paper. Seeing it, him suddenly sneered unpleasantly. Look, here's the divorce application. He waved the paper in front of me. Confident I couldn't leave this house. But my decision was firm. This time, I would leave the house. And the next day, I took the kids and went back to my parents' house. Mom welcomed us warmly, but I was worried. I kept checking my mobile phone, fearing Ronald might be furious for not returning. However, surprisingly, there was no call or text. Just then, the doorbell of my parents' house rang. Tentatively, I opened the door. There was Ronald, standing in front of me. He must have come to my parents' house, not wanting to let go of his housekeeper, me. It looked like I had to fight. I clenched my fist and glared at Ronald. But Ronald was acting strangely. He was crying rivers of tears. Cynthia, I'm sorry. I've been awful to you. I don't know what to say. He was desperately apologizing, his voice trembling. What's going on? Is this really the terrible Ronald? Doubtful, I was staring at him when someone appeared before me. My name is Cynthia, 42 years old. A perfectly ordinary, average housewife. My husband is Ronald, for years my junior. Ronald is an executive at a construction company run by my Fael, Mark. We have 2 children, an 8-year-old daughter named Patricia, and a 2-year-old son, Kevin. Our family home is a white mansion on a hilltop. It was built new 5 years ago. Constructed by Mark's company, it was fitted with all high-end materials. The spacious garden, adorned with various flowers, resembled a garden from abroad. A life everyone envies, an ideal happiness. But it was all an illusion. There's a saying, the grass is always greener on the other side. From the outside, our lawn must seem very green. However, the reality was dire. What was growing in our yard was not grass. It was the malicious intent of rotten-hearted people. It all started with my husband, Ronald. Marrying him was the beginning of the tragedy. I met Ronald when I was 32. At the time, I was working as an ordinary office worker. Just when I began thinking it was time to settle down and get married, I met him through a friend's introduction. He was incredibly kind and always had a smile on his face. He was a great conversationalist, knew about wonderful places and fun activities, and I quickly fell for him. He held an executive position in his family's company and was financially well off. Rich and with a good personality. It was unbelievable he didn't have a girlfriend. I doubted it many times. I even accused him of playing with me or being a marriage scammer. But he denied it every time. And then, he would whisper words of love. He truly cared about me. Feeling loved started to slowly sink in. Then Ronald proposed. I was over the moon and we got married right away. My mom was thrilled. Actually, my parents had divorced when I was young, and I was raised in a single-parent home by my mom. My mom struggled to raise me. Finally, I could give her some peace of mind. That's what I was full of back then. So, I didn't notice at all that a tragedy was waiting for us. It happened just after we got married. Ronald came home from work, changed, and sat at the dining table. On the table was a hamburger steak I had worked hard to make. While we were having a trivial conversation, he took a bite. Then, his expression suddenly turned serious. He stood up with his plate and threw the meal into the trash. What are you doing? Contrary to my almost screaming voice, he coldly retorted, It's disgusting. I can't eat this. Make it again. But I'm not that good at cooking, but I did my best. Shut up. You used cheap meat, didn't you? Do you think I eat commoner's meat? Use top-grade meat. I was stunned by his sudden change. I had never seen this side of him before. Where had the always smiling, kind Ronald gone? If you understand, then answer me. My word is law. Yes, yes. I replied, dazed. From that day on, hellish days began. Day after day, I was blamed for any slight mishap in household chores. Despite following instructions to prepare meals, Ronald would nitpick the seasoning and even the origin of the vegetables. And regarding cleaning and laundry, if anything was slightly unsatisfactory, he criticized me. A housewife and you can't even do this. This became his usual phrase. I used to be an office worker, but I quit my job after getting married at Ronald's request. He wanted me to focus on being a housewife, but I never imagined it would be this demanding. He was clearly a different person from before we married. Being unable to do household chores perfectly means you're being lazy. If this is all you can do, you don't deserve to be a housewife. As punishment, you'll also work for my company. It was abrupt. For such a selfish reason, I was saddled with office work at Ronald's company as well. There were obviously clerical staff at the company. There was no need for me specifically to do it. Watching me scramble with household and work duties, he seemed to find it amusing. It was harassment, plain and simple. What a terrible person. If only I had seen through him before we got married. But Ronald at the time of our meeting had perfectly played the role of a good person. He showed his true colors only after we couldn't escape, after getting married. Unbelievable. That such a man could exist in this world. I started doing office tasks in between household chores. But of course, I wasn't getting paid. He must have spoken to the company well. Ronald is an executive. He could manipulate the situation as he pleased. The only person above him was his father, Mark. Mark is not only the company's president but also serves as a city council member and is known locally as a person of stature. He seems quite busy, and I've only met him during family meetings and our wedding. I imagine he might be as terrible as Ronald behind closed doors. Ronald's mom died of illness when he was young, and there's no one to stop Ronald. I was in despair. Eventually, I became pregnant. Honestly, my feelings were complicated. Being married without children would look bad. He said this with a distasteful sneer. I had no right to refuse. If I did, who knows what he'd do to me. So, there was no love in that act. I lost the will to resist and spent my days with a numb heart. Later, I gave birth to a girl whom we named Patricia. Patricia was adorable, but with household, work, and now child-rearing, my exhaustion reached its limits. Ronald, without a shred of compassion, would harshly scold me for the slightest negligence. I was at my breaking point. One day, I brought it up. Ronald, I can't do this anymore. I can't endure being treated like a slave. I want a divorce. Ronald then smiled like a devil. I have no intention of letting go of my housekeeper. I was shocked. Do you know why I married an older woman like you? Because you're a replacement for a housekeeper. Marrying a young woman, she'll get old soon enough, right? It's better to keep young women for fun. An older woman who can do house chores is best for a wife. He said, twisting his face into a sneer. What a thing! To think he married me for such a reason. He married me with the intention of using me as a slave from the start. There was never any love. Besides, what will you do if we divorce? Let me tell you, I won't pay any child support. You and Patricia can't possibly make it on your own, especially when you can't earn. His words hit a sore spot, and I was at a loss for words. Indeed, with a young child, working as a full-time employee was not an option. Even if I put Patricia in daycare, part-time work with short hours would be my limit. But that would make it difficult to cover Patricia's educational expenses, among other things. Or will you work at that dirty diner your mom runs? That filthy place can't be making much money. Mom owned a casual dining place. Thanks to my mom's kind personality and simple cooking, the restaurant was always bustling. But it was, after all, a small countryside establishment. As Ronald said, it wasn't making much money. Even in such circumstances, Mom managed to put me through vocational school, which must have been quite a struggle. When I got married, Mom was truly happy for me. If I divorced, I'd be letting down such a mom. I bit my lip. Do you understand? Besides, this area is the territory of Smith builders. If you even think of running away, you and your kids will never be able to walk around here again. With that, he burst into laughter. He was threatening me and the children. I couldn't stand the thought of doing exactly what such a person wanted. But in this situation with no way out, I was powerless. The miserable days continued as usual. I became pregnant with my second child. It's about time we had a second one. Most families around me have 2 kids. We need another one to fit in. Such a petty reason. To have a child for such a reason. But I couldn't resist. If I said anything, I'd be showered with cruel words. I was exhausted. In all this, the only ray of hope was Patricia. Patricia had turned 8 years old. So adorable, the saying you couldn't love them more if you tried became clear to me after having Patricia. My only concern was that she was too quiet. She had never shown a rebellious attitude. Always obediently listening to everything her parents said, with a straight face. She was a good child, but sometimes I thought she could be a bit more childlike. Maybe it was because of living in such a house. Compared to my own childhood, Patricia was growing up without want. But living in the intimidating atmosphere created by Ronald, she might always be tense. I was filled with a frustrating desire to do something for her. Amidst this, I gave birth to my second child. It was a boy, and we named him Kevin. Kevin often cried at night, a pattern that continued even at 2 years old. I was always sleep-deprived, juggling Ronald's company work as well. Housework, job, and childcare. I was completely worn out from all these. One day, as usual, I was doing data entry for his company. I had planned to finish it by noon, but I must have been really tired. I fell asleep halfway through. When I realized it, it was too late. Hey! Is that data ready? Ronald was immediately on me for a check. Well. I accidentally fell asleep. It's not done yet. I'll start on it now. What? What have you been doing? I told you it was urgent. You're useless. His harsh words flew at me. In such situations, all I could do was wait for the storm to pass. As I was shrinking away, Patricia, who had been watching, stood up between me and Ronald. Don't yell at Mom. Her voice was firm. She had never once spoken up to her parents like this before. Ronald glared at Patricia. What's this? Talking back to your father? I'm the absolute authority in this house. He shouted and kicked a chair nearby. Patricia was frightened. But she tried to protect me, spreading her small body wide to shield me. That moment, I clearly realized. This little child was trying to speak up, and yet, I had never been able to stand up to him. Wasn't my role as a parent to protect Patricia and Kevin from such a terrible environment? I hugged Patricia with all my might, mustering up courage. Then, looking Ronald in the eye, I spoke clearly. Enough is enough. Taking your anger out on such a small child. I can't go on with you anymore. Then, after a pause, I declared, I will be returning to my parents' home. Hearing my words, Ronald began to rant in anger. Huh? What about my meals? The cleaning? If you're leaving, write a divorce application before you go. He quickly opened a drawer and took out a sheet of paper. Seeing it, Ronald suddenly sneered unpleasantly. Look, here's the divorce application. He waved the paper in front of me. Confident I couldn't leave this house. Ronald immediately signed in the husband's section. There, I've signed it. You don't have the guts to submit it. You'll just go back to being poor if you leave. You can't make Patricia and Kevin live in poverty, can you? Ha ha ha. He said smugly, bursting into laughter. You're incapable of anything. Got it? Don't defy me. All right? Ronald spat out in a strong tone and left the room. I collapsed on the spot, feeling deflated. I had finally said it. My body started to tremble. Patricia then quietly said to me, Mom, I'm okay. I don't mind being poor. It was really hard watching you struggle every day. I thought if I was a good girl, things would get better, but they never did. So, I think it's better if we leave. Patricia. I had always thought Patricia was still too young, but she understood the situation of the adults well. I had believed I couldn't subject my children to a life of poverty. But more than that, it was dangerous to leave my children in this environment. The words leaving that I had inadvertently uttered, this time I would act on them. I can't just give up now. Fortunately, every time he yelled at me, I had made a certain arrangement. With this, I could fight back. I clenched my fist, making a promise in my heart. To leave this house. The night passed without sleep. Ronald went to his company, Patricia to her elementary school. Left in the house were Kevin and I. I sorted through my belongings, packing only the essentials. Holding Kevin in one arm and a Boston bag in the other. Goodbye. Whispering so, I opened the door of the house and stepped outside. The luxurious mansion and the spacious garden meant nothing to me. It was akin to a view of hell. I, by my own will, said goodbye to this life. Thus, leaving the house, I headed to the city office and immediately submitted the divorce papers I had signed last night. Everyone had gone to sleep, and right after, I signed my section. It was anticlimactic. To think that divorce could be so simple. Then I went to a cafe near Patricia's elementary school to wait for her to finish school. In the evening, when I saw Patricia, I called out to her. It seemed like she understood. She knew why I was there with a Boston bag and holding Kevin. Holding Patricia's hand firmly, I, with my 2 children, returned to my parents' house. Oh, what happened? Why so sudden? Seeing me with luggage and the children, my mom was surprised. Mom. The moment I saw her face, my tears started to flow. I hadn't planned on crying. Without saying anything, she warmly welcomed me. Drinking the hot cocoa she made in the living room, I felt a bit more at ease. Then, I gradually shared the story of my married life. After listening to me for a while, my mom fell silent. So that's what happened. I noticed your voice lacked energy sometimes. I was worried. I thought I hid it well. What are you talking about? You probably thought you'd worry me and kept it all to yourself. Don't be so reserved, really. Typical mom, she saw right through me. You're not alone. You shouldn't hesitate when you're in trouble. That's right, Mom. I'm on your side too. Hearing Patricia's words, Mom murmured, impressed. Oh, how reassuring. That's right. I had completely forgotten, being dominated by Ronald both physically and emotionally, that I have such reliable people around me. Realizing that almost made me tear up again. Then, Mom turned serious again and said, Speaking of reliable people, there's someone else who can help you. Who? Call this number. Saying so, Mom took out a business card from her purse. It read Smith Builders President Mark Smith. Mark! Yes. Yes? But that's Ronald's father. What could he possibly say? He'll surely worry about appearances and scold me. Just call him. What was Mom thinking? Half in doubt, I dialed the number on the business card. Why did Mom have his business card in the first place? Hello? Mark answered the phone immediately. I started to speak nervously. Is this Mark? It's me, Cynthia. I trust you and have something to discuss. Do you have a moment now? Then, I recounted everything in order, including my divorce from Ronald. Mark gasped. Then, an entirely unexpected turn of events occurred. Days passed. I was worried Ronald might be furious for not coming back. I checked my mobile phone numerous times a day, but surprisingly, there were no calls or emails. It's okay, you talked to Mark, right? Mom said cheerfully. But my unease remained. Then, the doorbell at my parents' house rang. Tentatively, I opened the door. Standing there was Ronald. He must have come to my parents' house, not wanting to let go of his housekeeper, me. I had to fight. I clenched my fist and glared at Ronald. But he was acting strangely. He was crying rivers of tears. Cynthia. I'm sorry. I've been awful to you. I don't know what to say. I couldn't understand what he was saying. Was this really him? Or was it an act? Behind him stood Mark. Mark! Cynthia, I'm sorry. Mark said, apologizing deeply. Oh, Mark came too. It's awkward to talk here. Why don't you come in? At Mom's suggestion, we moved to the living room to talk. I don't know what to say about my foolish son's outrageous actions. Mark kept apologizing, while Ronald, pale-faced, shed tears. I never expected such a situation. I always thought Mark, like Ronald, was a two-faced cold person. But I was wrong. When I called Mark as Mom suggested, he immediately said, Cynthia. I've always been grateful to your mom, Sarah. Listening further, a surprising truth emerged. Mark was a regular at Mom's casual dining place. He would share his work troubles and daily events with Mom. And he always made a point of saying, Please, let's keep this conversation just between us. As the president of Smith Builders, he couldn't show weakness publicly. Mom's casual dining place was the one place he could be himself. Upon hearing my story, Mark was furious. He immediately confronted Ronald. At first, Ronald pretended not to know. Naturally, he would want to keep his harassment of me a secret from Mark, his parent. After all, he had always tried to appear good in front of him. Pretending to be a sincere and polite person, fitting to be the next president of Smith Builders. But I had sent Mark a text with a voice recording from my mobile phone, which could serve as evidence. Anticipating such a scenario, I had recorded Ronald's verbal abuse. The recording was full of unbearable slander. Hearing it, Ronald turned pale. Realizing he had no excuses left, he remained silent, trembling. Mark's anger did not subside. Mark wasn't a terrible person like him. He genuinely had a heart. He had dragged him here today to properly apologize to me. "I'm truly sorry. I've stripped Ronald of all his positions. Starting today, he'll be working part-time, essentially from the bottom up. I'll make sure his twisted nature is corrected." Mark glared sharply at him. Ronald was again frightened. It seems he was severely scolded on the way here. A grown man brought to tears must have suffered a great deal. I spoke quietly. "Ronald, I don't have any sympathy for you. I will never forget what you've done to me. Your apology doesn't heal the wounds. But time doesn't go back. So at least from now on, change your attitude. Not just outwardly, but truly appreciate and show kindness to people from your heart. That's my wish." He just cried and nodded to my words. With that, I said what I needed to say. We discussed child support next, then decided to disband for the day. After Mark and Ronald left, I felt exhausted. Everything was resolved. I could finally relax. But it was too soon to take a breath. The end was not yet in sight. Afterward, I started working at Mom's casual diner. Staying at home doing nothing felt wrong, and I wanted to help Mom, especially now that I was living here. Plus, there was my son, Kevin. Leaving him somewhere else to work would mean additional costs. Working at the casual diner allowed me to keep him close while working. I revitalized the daytime menu, trying to attract more customers. Perhaps because of these efforts, it seemed like we had more new customers than before. If sales continued to rise, it would be perfect. Thinking this, one evening, as we were preparing to open for the night, Patricia rushed into the diner, out of breath. "Mom, Grandma! Hurry!" "What's wrong, Patricia?" Patricia usually went straight home after school, not the diner, which was about 10 minutes away. It was unusual for her to come to the diner on a weekday. "When I got home just now, the house was on fire." "What?" I was stunned, unable to comprehend what was happening. But quickly regaining my composure, I picked up Kevin, and together with Mom and Patricia, we hurried towards our home. Upon arrival, there indeed was a burnt smell. Though the fire was out, part of the wooden house was blackened. Neighbors had put out the fire, and it seems only part of the first floor was burnt. Relieved, I then heard shouting nearby. "What are you doing? Let go of me!" I'll never forget that voice. It was Ronald. Following the voice, I found him being restrained by a man, yelling. The man holding him was a neighbor. He looked at us and said, "This guy was trying to set your house on fire and run away. I've called the police. They should be here soon." Ronald, Mom, Patricia, and I looked at him with pity. "What are you doing? Is it true Ronald set the fire?" "Yeah, it's true. You all ruined my life. I can't rest until I drag you all to hell with me." Ronald screamed loudly. I was utterly flabbergasted. "What are you saying? You brought this upon yourself, didn't you? Was all that crying and remorse just a lie?" "Of course it was. I had to act that way because my dad was there." He spat out defiantly, his face twisted grotesquely. So those tears were just an act. Such a despicable person. As I glared at him with contempt, Patricia quietly said, "You're the worst. Even monkeys can show remorse, you know?" If you don't truly change, no one will follow you. Perhaps hit too close to home by his child's words. His face turned red as he yelled, "Shut up! It's all your fault! You're the reason I lost my position. I was supposed to be the next president of Smith Builders. I'm not like you poor people." Even now, he was still saying such things. Then, Mom murmured, "Such a sad child. Desperate to be liked by Mark from the moment the truth was revealed." "What do you mean?" With a sad face, Mom said, "Ronald isn't Mark's biological child." "What?" I had no idea. All I knew about Ronald's background was that he lost his mom when he was young. He wasn't Mark's biological child. Ronald, who had just spewed such vile words, fell silent with a complex expression. Mom began to tell the story. "I heard it from Mark. Mark and his late wife couldn't have children. So, they adopted a child, and that was Ronald. But when Ronald was in elementary school, his wife passed away. That's when he told him the truth. 'You're not my real child.' Since then, you changed. You hid your childlike innocence and became a seemingly well-mannered, good child." Of course, that was just on the surface. After a pause, Mom continued, "From the moment you knew you weren't his real child, you felt you had to prove yourself worthy of the Smith family, going above and beyond to present yourself in a better light. But such a state couldn't last forever. That's why you lashed out at your family, at Cynthia, to relieve your stress." So that was it. Ronald's excessively cruel words. His enjoyment of hurling harsh words at me and relishing my reactions. All were reactions to the facade he maintained outside. I slowly began to speak. "I sympathize with your upbringing. But that doesn't give you the right to hurt others. Setting fire to a house, what were you thinking? It's a crime. What if someone had been caught in the fire? What if Mom, Patricia, or Kevin had been inside?" My voice began to tremble. The worst-case scenario terrified me. "How could you do such a horrible thing and be okay with it? I never thought you were so rotten. What do you think of human life? I will never forgive you. I will never forgive you." The area fell silent at my outburst. Soon, the sound of police sirens could be heard. I couldn't wait for them to take Ronald away. I never wanted to see his face again. Afterwards, Ronald was arrested for arson. Arson being a serious crime, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Naturally, this devilish act was once again made known to Mark, who was shocked beyond measure. "I'm truly sorry. I have no more words of apology." Mark apologized. All we could manage to say to him was, "Please don't apologize." Even though he wasn't my biological son. I thought I raised him well. But, being consumed by work every day, I failed to see his true distorted nature, causing so much trouble to others. There's no other way but to disown him," he said, tears streaming down his face. It was understandable. Mark, too, had been deceived by that devil. Mark offered to completely cover the costs for the rebuilding of our partially destroyed home. Furthermore, he offered to pay the child support that he was supposed to provide. It was a more than generous amount. "We can't accept that much." We initially hesitated, but, "No, please take it. It's partly my responsibility that he turned out this way. I can't apologize enough. Use this money to rebuild your home and raise Patricia and Kevin properly." He insisted. "All right." I relented and nodded. Time passed, and eventually, Ronald was released. But there was no return for him to Mark. To ensure he wouldn't harm us, Mark arranged a job for him overseas. He is supposedly working in an Australian coal mine now. Honestly, I felt relieved. For the children's sake, it was better without such a terrifying father. Meanwhile, I continued working at Mom's casual diner. Patricia became a high school student, and Kevin entered elementary school. Mom, Grandma, I'm home. Played soccer and now I'm starving. Can I have some pasta? He burst into the diner, shouting energetically. Again? Kevin, aren't you eating too much of the diner's food? Patricia quickly retorted. Now a high schooler, Patricia occasionally helped out at the diner. She had matured significantly, firmly taking on the role of an elder sister. It's fine, I'm quality checking to make sure the taste hasn't dropped. Kevin joked, prompting Mom to interject. What are you talking about? You can eat, but wash the dishes first. Muttering under his breath, Kevin headed into the kitchen. Watching him, we exchanged smiles. It was just another peaceful afternoon. I'm not wealthy, nor do I live in a mansion. But being able to spend peaceful moments with my beloved family without any pretense is a treasure that feels incredibly dear. I silently prayed in my heart for these times to last forever. Although he was my father-in-law, it was a nuisance. Dirty and smelly, I'm relieved he's gone. I was always on edge, wondering how long he would live. At the back door of the church, that was Kathy talking to someone. I stood there, shaking with anger. Unforgivable. In place of my late husband Oliver, I decided to expose Kathy's true nature and seek revenge. I watched her quietly with a steely gaze. My name is Flora, 76 years old. I live with my husband and eldest son. But it's not an ordinary family of three. My husband Oliver developed early-onset Alzheimer's disease. Now, his diabetes has worsened, and he's bedridden. We hired a home caregiver, and I also take care of him. Our son Floyd is 46. He's successful at work, now a manager. But he's not married. I envy friends who travel with their spouses, celebrating their children's marriages and grandchildren, but I'm happy we're living comfortably. Then, one day, Floyd said, I've decided to get married. I was so surprised I almost fainted. I had thought Floyd would never get married. Really? Marriage? You're not being deceived, are you? I asked dramatically, and Floyd laughed. No way. She's from a company we deal with, a really nice girl. She always greets me with a smile. After years without celebrations, I felt increasingly happy for my son. Later, we had a family meeting. His fiancée was Kathy. At the hotel, she arrived in a beautiful dress and greeted me with the calm smile Floyd mentioned. Flora, nice to meet you. I look forward to being part of your family. She's 34, 12 years younger than Floyd, and I was impressed by her polite greeting and demeanor. I wondered why such a wonderful lady chose Floyd. Nice to meet you too. I'm sorry my husband couldn't come. Please, don't apologize. I know about Oliver's condition. But as a family member, let me know if I can be of any help. Her words moved me to tears. I was overwhelmed with gratitude for the good person who came into our lives. I felt embarrassed for even suspecting that Floyd might be getting deceived. Also, my parents couldn't make it either. We couldn't adjust their schedules, I'm sorry. I've told them about the marriage, and they trust my choice, so please don't worry about our family. Kathy said this with a cheerful smile. Indeed, she was here alone. For a moment, I thought it was odd for parents to miss a family meeting, but trusting Kathy's words, I thought she must be a trustworthy daughter and didn't probe further. Then, they got married and started living with me. They didn't have a wedding ceremony, but took wedding photos together. I had hoped for a ceremony, but I suppressed my feelings, knowing it's not just for the parents. A few days later, the wedding photos arrived. Holding back my eagerness, I said to Kathy, "Your wedding photos have arrived." Kathy happily took the envelope from me. "Wow, they've already arrived. Floyd will be thrilled. I'll put them in our room." However, she didn't show any intention of opening them in front of me and took them to their bedroom. Of course, I understood they should see them first, but it was strange that she didn't even seem to want to open them. I kept smiling, though feeling a bit uneasy. Some time later, Kathy quit her job and offered to help me with the caregiving. I was really touched. Taking care of someone else's family is hard to do unless that is your job. It's enough that you're willing to think about it. "But I am family, right?" "Don't worry," Kathy insisted. So, I asked her to check on Oliver when I was busy and be his conversation partner when she had time. Leave the diapers to me or the home caregiver. Even just asking him if he needs anything is a big help, and talking is good rehabilitation. Kathy readily agreed. But I couldn't understand why I hadn't asked Kathy for help with the caregiving before. Sure, I was considerate. But maybe I didn't fully trust her. At the same time, I felt bad for doubting her, knowing she was a good person. One day, Oliver said, "I think Kathy dislikes me." What? I was surprised. But Oliver had Alzheimer's. His words often lacked consistency. I reassured him. "That's not true. She's a wonderful person who cares about family." "No. That's wrong." "Why would you say that?" Then, Oliver looked me in the eyes and said, "She looks at me with a mocking smile. It's scary." I fell silent at his words. Then laughed it off. "It's nice to be smiled at by someone young, isn't it?" I knew it was a delusion, but the thought of how Kathy might really be looking at Oliver sent chills down my spine. Then, one day, almost forgetting about it, I received a call from the home caregiver who visits Oliver. A call, even though she visits daily? Confused, I answered, and she said, "I need to talk to you about something." I was wondering what it was about. The words came out was never expected. "Floyd's wife Kathy. I think it's better if she doesn't get involved with Oliver anymore." "Why? What happened?" "Oliver seems frightened of her. Maybe she's saying something unpleasant to him." Her words reminded me of what Oliver had said. If Kathy was really saying such things to Oliver, I felt responsible for asking her to check on him. After hanging up, I muttered, "I can't just sit back." I hurried to Oliver's room. "Oliver? I need to ask you something." But it was too late to talk to Oliver. Just hours after eating his meal cheerfully, he had peacefully passed away and gone to heaven. I didn't remember much about what happened next. I was busy making calls, arranging for a doctor's visit, but the doctor only shook his head. Before I knew it, I was at the church Floyd had arranged. The date must have changed, but I haven't slept or eaten, so I've lost all sense of time. My body and soul are exhausted, and instead of feeling relieved from caregiving, I'm overwhelmed with loneliness. It should have been hard, but all I can remember is Oliver when he was healthy. Thinking of that, I just couldn't stop crying. Flora. While Floyd was busy as the family representative, Kathy was there, concerned about me, staying by my side. Her parents couldn't come for the farewell due to the distance, but they sent a wreath and a letter through Kathy. Though I was still troubled by the home caregiver's words, I couldn't believe that Kathy, raised in such a wonderful family, would harass Oliver. Then, someone appeared in front of Kathy and me. "Please accept my sincere condolences." A few people greeted us deeply. Kathy stood up to greet them on my behalf. They seemed to be from Floyd's company. Kathy must know them from her time at the client company. "Flora, please stay seated," Kathy told me, then thanked them for their attendance and led them to Oliver. I was completely reassured by her demeanor. And the wake ended. Gradually coming to terms with Oliver's passing, I felt guilty for leaving everything to Floyd and Kathy and started greeting the attendees. But most had left, and I couldn't see Kathy. Where's Kathy? She's not here. Maybe she's still seeing people off. I'll go check. I told Floyd and headed to the parking lot. Then, from behind the church, I heard Kathy's voice. I found you. I muttered to myself. It was dark, and I was likely unseen from the other side. However, Kathy, illuminated by the church's back door light, seemed to be talking to a man. It's finally over. I stopped at those words. Well, it went according to plan, didn't it? But still, he was such a nuisance. Dirty and smelly, I'm glad he's gone. I was always restless, wondering how long he would live. I turned pale. Was that really Kathy? But I clearly heard her voice, and it was Kathy in front of me. So, when are you divorcing? Once the inheritance comes in, I'll transfer it to my bank account, then probably. That guy seemed to have less than I thought, but Floyd should inherit at least $100,000. Floyd got himself caught by a real piece. It's his fault for being deceived. I stood there, trembling with anger. I had suspected something was off. Kathy targeted Floyd for his inheritance. I couldn't forgive her. I swore to myself. Kathy then entered through the back door. The man, unaware I had witnessed yesterday's scene, left in a white luxury car and appeared at the funeral the next day as if nothing had happened. Ah, Richard, thank you for coming on your day off. Floyd greeted him. Apparently, he was a subordinate at Floyd's company. No, Floyd. I know it's tough, but please don't overdo it. Thank you. Thank you. Kathy also greeted politely beside Floyd. Just yesterday, they were laughing and chatting like close friends. When I thought this, I noticed his simple ring on the left ring finger. A simple ring was worn on the ring finger. The ring indicated he was married, and at the same time, I wondered if he could be involved with Kathy. The reason they stayed till the end, talking in a secluded spot, and the way they hid their relationship today, unlike their friendly interaction yesterday, all felt off. It didn't take long for my suspicions to turn into certainty. They exchanged glances and laughed together, trying not to be noticed by anyone. How inappropriate. But first, I had a duty to see Oliver off. I managed to hide my anger and fulfill my duties until the end. A few days after the funeral, I finally calmed down and told Floyd first. I mentioned the talk with the home caregiver, the conversation with Richard, and many other things that felt off. Initially, Floyd laughed it off, saying it was all in my head and impossible. If Floyd didn't believe me, I had to consider what to do next. Seeing me troubled, he said, "Let's drop this topic. Do you have any other concerns?" I think it's all Mom's misunderstanding. Desperate to make him believe Kathy's wrongdoings, I blurted out. By the way, what about the wedding photos? I haven't seen them. Wedding photos? Haven't they arrived yet? Floyd asked, puzzled. I replied, they've arrived long ago, and Kathy put them away. Really? Why didn't she tell me they arrived? I don't know. You should ask her. Floyd asked Kathy that day, in front of me. Kathy looked momentarily flustered but quickly composed herself and said, "Oh, those. I sent them to my parents' house to show them. You know, they haven't met Floyd yet, and I wanted to show him off. I'll ask them to send it back." She was quite talkative, I thought. Indeed, she had always been explanatory. As if hiding lies by talking about things no one had asked. Floyd almost seemed convinced, so without wasting a moment, I said to her, "I would like to see them too. Can you get just the photos sent first? Maybe I should call them." At my words, Kathy hurriedly said, "No, my parents are not good with relative relations." "Oh, but they wrote a letter besides sending a wreath at the funeral? They seem very polite for people who are bad with relatives." Kathy fell silent. Seeing this, Floyd must have felt something was off too. "Call your parents right now. I want to greet them." Kathy still didn't move. I exchanged glances with Floyd. I couldn't fathom her thoughts, but it was clear she was hiding something. In the end, she never contacted her parents, and we never saw the wedding photos. Probably, they were already thrown away. I think she didn't have a wedding because she planned to divorce from the start. Regret fills me, thinking if I had paid attention to my feelings back then, I might have realized her true nature sooner and spared Oliver from suffering. That's why I'm determined not to let her have her way. From that day, Kathy became distant. Worried about her true identity being revealed and possibly being driven out of the house. Then, I received a call from the dispatch company of the home caregiver who took care of Oliver. Apparently, there was an issue with Oliver's diary during an audit, and they wanted to discuss it. That day, 2 people, seemingly from the health department, arrived at our house with a tense atmosphere. Actually, there are descriptions in the home caregiver's diary suggesting that a family member was abusing Mr. Oliver. Abuse? I was so shocked that I exclaimed loudly. What? How could? I've always been careful. Please calm down. Here is the home caregiver's diary. I looked at the diary handed to me by the officer. Then, I saw shocking words. April 13th, report of Oliver saying he was hit by Kathy. However, no bruises were found, and it seemed to be due to his dementia. I felt tense reading these words. Seeing my reaction, the officer continued. May 7th, upon visiting, Kathy was seen leaving Oliver's room. When asked what she said to him, he reported she told him to go away. For several days after, he was listless and became fearful when she was mentioned, so it was reported to Flora. That was the last entry in the diary. That was the day Oliver passed away. My hands started shaking, and I couldn't stop my tears. Now that Oliver is gone, we can't know the truth for sure, but may we speak with Kathy? I nodded quietly several times. It may not be the direct cause, but to hear go away on the day he passed away. It feels like that was the cause, from a family's point of view. I told the health department officers that Kathy was upstairs. Concerned about my tears, they headed upstairs together. Who's there? What do you want? Kathy, shouting loudly upstairs, apparently refused to talk to the officers after learning their reason for visiting, saying, I don't know anything. Oliver had dementia, it's not my fault. If you refuse to talk, we'll have to involve the police and conduct an investigation. As soon as Kathy heard the officer's loud voice, she stopped making noise. She must have stopped resisting. Can we talk to you at the health department, not here? Out of concern for me, they decided to talk with her at the health department instead. As Kathy came downstairs, our eyes met. Flora, please tell them it's a misunderstanding. Her face pale, she begged me for help. But after seeing the diary, her words didn't resonate with me. Reflect on your actions and explain yourself. Kathy must have thought I would support her. Surprised by my unexpected words, she was lost for words. It was past noon when the health department officers arrived, but she didn't return until late at night. When I explained everything to Floyd, who returned home earlier, he turned pale with anger. Finally realizing Kathy's true nature, he talked about divorce. Wait. There's something else that bothers me. I then told him about the suspicious relationship between Kathy and Richard, whom she met at the back door on the day of the funeral. She was having an affair? Even knowing Kathy's true nature, the shock was evident, and Floyd slumped down. I can't be sure. But it didn't sound like a conversation with an employee from a business partner. Floyd sighed at my words. Let's pretend we don't know anything for a while and observe the situation, he suggested. I nodded in agreement, thinking about what to do next. Kathy returned home late that day. She was exhausted and said she couldn't eat. I did nothing wrong, but nobody believes me. Even you, Flora, it's unfair. Kathy burst into tears. She seemed greatly disheartened, having been scolded thoroughly by the health department. Later, I was contacted by the health department, who said I could file a complaint on behalf of Oliver. Kathy doesn't seem to be reflecting, and I don't plan to let her off either. Things are about to get busy. Floyd hired a detective to keep an eye on Kathy's actions. Soon enough, evidence surfaced. Kathy and Richard met secretly 3 times in 1 week. Moreover, Richard would meet Kathy while supposedly out on sales visits and go to a hotel. Naturally, this was grounds for his dismissal. Richard's outings were supposedly for prospecting new clients. Next time he says that, let's set up a stakeout. I decided to get notified when he left under that pretext. That day came quickly. After lunch, Kathy left without saying where she was going. As I suspected, Floyd called. Rushing to the meeting place, Floyd was already there, looking defeated. Though expected, I was also at a loss for words. In his line of sight were, as anticipated, Richard and Kathy. Unaware of us, they walked arm in arm into the hotel. 2 hours later, they emerged the same way, and Floyd and I confronted them. "What the hell do you two think you're doing?" "Floyd!" At Floyd's voice, the two turned, their faces turning pale. Floyd stood before them, glaring at Kathy and then Richard. "What is this? Explain." It was daytime in a hotel district. Nearby was a supermarket, attracting various onlookers. This is... Kathy, panicking, moved away from Richard, her face pale and eyes darting. "So, you two were in this kind of relationship?" I also followed and shouted loudly at the two of them. It seemed that Kathy finally realized I was there because of my voice. And my voice probably drew the attention of the onlookers around us. One of the bystanders said, "Isn't that Richard? You know, Sharon from the kindergarten's father." "Really? Wow, an affair?" Apparently, they knew Richard. I knew Richard was married, but I didn't know he had a child. Hearing those words, Richard fled with a pale face. "Wait, hold on!" Kathy called after him, but Richard likely couldn't hear her anymore. "We're getting a divorce. And of course, you'll pay a hefty settlement." At Floyd's words, Kathy, pale-faced, sat down on the spot, crying. Afterward, the complaint I filed was accepted, and I was told I could seek compensation from Kathy on Oliver's behalf. Currently, I'm in discussions with a lawyer. In the meantime, Kathy and Floyd divorced. The inheritance originally meant for Oliver went entirely to Floyd, and Kathy was sued for the affair's damages. Richard, who had the affair during work hours, was fired. His family found out, leading to his divorce as well. Kathy was now faced with demands for compensation from Richard's family. Now she regrets her actions, but it's too late. It turned out she had approached Floyd for money, and her parents didn't even know about her marriage. After all the commotion, we finally met her parents, who deeply apologized. It turns out she had arranged the wreath and letters herself. To go to such lengths to make herself appear as a good wife to us, I'm astounded at her meticulous deceit. But in the end, her marriage left her with nothing but debt. This experience will surely be a lifelong barrier for her. Afterward, life with Floyd alone began. With everything over, there's relief but also loneliness. However, a few years later, Floyd said he was getting married. After Kathy, I couldn't approve, but the woman Floyd brought was the home caregiver who had always looked after Oliver. "I never expected this connection, but I'm glad to meet you again. Please let me visit Oliver's grave." I knew her well. And I thought, with her, Floyd could surely be happy. As I believed, a year after their marriage, a lovely baby was born. I never thought I'd become a grandmother, so every day is filled with happiness. My goal now is to stay healthy to watch this child grow. And someday, when I reunite with Oliver in heaven, I want to watch over our son's family together from above.